Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of the NACDA and Affiliates virtual programming lineup. I'm Dana Leroy, Communications Manager for NACDA, and we're glad to have you with us today for this sponsored content session with Fusion Sport. Today's session is titled Back on Track, the Return to Training During COVID-19. Our speakers will be discussing illness screening, injury risk, training logistics, technology, and the rise of the bubble, giving us insight into how college athletics departments around the country are navigating the return to training and planning for the future during COVID-19. We have two representatives here with us from Fusion Sport to lead the conversation: Tricia Sterland, Vice President of Enterprise Solutions, and Mike Compton, Sports Science Consultant and Strength Coach. Our campus panelists are Lauren Green, Assistant Athletics Director for Sports Science at UC San Diego, Aaron Himmler, Assistant Athletics Director for Sports Medicine and Head Football Athletic Trainer at the University of Cincinnati, and Mike Joseph, Assistant Athletics Director and Head Coach for Football Strength and Conditioning at West Virginia University. Before we officially begin, a quick reminder for our live attendees using Zoom to utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window to send in your questions for our speakers, and we will have allotted time at the end of the presentation to answer them. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tricia to start the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Dana. I'm really excited to have the panel on today. To start off with, it's really cool that we have three different divisions in collegiate sports today. We have the Big 12, the AAC, and recently to the Big West. So let's start with the state of the union for your university. For me, I look at the ever-changing rules, the directors, the data, HIPAA requirements, the illness, return to play, and it's a lot of chaos out there right now. So what I'd like to understand is, where are you at with your university? What are you required to do? What are you not required to do? Where are you at with fall sports? And anything else that you could add. So let's go ahead and start with you, Aaron.
Sure. We're still kind of going full throttle with football. We're one of the few Division I, conferences that are still attempting to play a fall season. Our Olympic sports, however, have all been kind of punted back to the spring. So a lot of our focus is trying to get our football season continuing to flow smoothly, continuing to roll with that. As it pertains to COVID, things that we're required to do, mandated by our conference, which should be starting probably this next week. Some of our sister schools, their first game is this coming weekend, so they'll get to implement some of these things, but we're going to be testing 3 times a week. Looks like kind of a Sunday, Wednesday, Friday type of test, to basically certify that we're continuing to be healthy, and the product that we put on the field as far as players are all healthy as well, and not trying to cross infect any visitors or any teams that we visit to. So that's kind of where we're at from that standpoint. Our Olympic sports, we're still trying to obviously make sure that strength and conditioning and any rehabilitative programs, physical therapy, that type of things are ongoing. So despite not, maybe having a competitive seasons for some of those teams in the fall, operations, to some extent are still, what we perceive as normal. A lot of them are completely different, but there's a lot of things that are still moving, and a lot of things that we still have to take care of.
Great, thanks. How about you, Lauren?
Yeah, so we're in an interesting situation. Obviously, this being our first probationary year, Division I, so obviously not postseason eligible, and we knew that before COVID and it was happening. So we already had a kind of a unique outlook from that sense, and as far as our strategic planning. But in reality, as far as COVID is related, we being in California and being in one of the most populated metro areas in the world, if you add San Diego, Tijuana together, we're in a pretty tough predicament from that standpoint. So county regulations, state regulations are all still pretty tight for us. We still haven't gotten back in the gym yet. We're not on campus. Our campus is still closed. We're actually going to propose a plan and prepare to start with our basketballs next week as their fall off season or preseason training goes. Interesting thing for us again is a D1 conference that does not primarily have football teams in it. So we have a couple of schools within our conference that do have football, in which their seasons were postponed, but essentially they're, as kind of Aaron said, they're still kind of trucking along through their fall, where the rest of the Olympic sports have all been postponed at least till past New Year's, including basketball. So basketball is really kind of a unique situation where they're in an early preseason, but everyone else, we've essentially just done a needs analysis and said, one, we already didn't have postseason to prepare for. Two, our falls aren't going to play or compete at least until the spring. And so we've essentially, just like the NCAA has, shifted our clock, right? And we've turned our summer into our fall. And what we've done is essentially revamped ourselves into doing a quasi summer camp, summer class type program. I'm happy to get into that more, but essentially, yeah, as far as the campus goes, we still have a lot of restrictions on us. So really, everything has been remote. Everything we can do over the phone, over Zoom, that, you know, maybe some things have changed from earlier in the summer that the NCAA has given us more guidance and more clearance on what we can and can't do. So we've started to do some of our preliminary screening, movement assessments, things like that, just over Zoom and over the phone before we get back to campus. So when we do, we can get right back into whatever we can, but still in a pretty precarious situation with really having not seen any of our athletes rehabbed all over the phone and everything else. So still learning lessons from these other universities that can start ahead of us.
Yeah, one day at a time, right? Awesome. How about you, Mike Joseph?
I'm very similar to Aaron in terms of Big 12, obviously a lot of protocols, and that goes back to, I think we've developed a pretty good lines of communication. Obviously started with President Gee and then Dr. Clay Marsh, who's head of our school, based in Western Medical Hospital system. And then our AT, head athletic trainer, Vince Blankenship, has been very good in terms of communicating with obviously our conference, but also we communicate daily, and I'm sure we'll get later in the call, talk about in terms of our platform, how we're kind of seeing communication in real time and getting very, very quickly. But it goes back to administration, Shane Lyons, Kelly Zen, obviously, and for me, the head football coach, Neil Brown, that everybody's on the same page, and obviously the athlete safety, and it's a very, very trying time, very, very stressful time in terms of getting everything organization. But daily, we're similar to, we're doing 3 times a week, testing staff-wise, student athlete, anybody is associated in terms of in-person daily basis. And our Olympic sports, fall sports, they were delayed slightly, but they're still a couple weeks out, and they'll start participation. So our fall sports are planning on participating this fall. And then obviously our winter sports, obviously a little bit delayed, but again, they're planning a schedule. The biggest thing in terms of what we do daily is a lot of things we had in place prior for the last year or two. I think the culture helped it, but I think we do COVID tests daily, and that's a way of us, for student athletes and staff, they have to, before you come to the building, before you come to a facility, you have to get that filled out. And it gives a kind of a alert to our team physician, AJ Monceau, and Vince Blankenship, our AT, and myself, kind of like, this is what's going on. Then obviously they'll dictate via phone, via messaging, what they need to do next. Obviously we do temps before you enter the building. And then at that point, we're doing wellness stuff throughout the day in different ways. We're measuring sleep. We're doing first beat in terms of HRV, our fatigue signs, in terms of how we do our sleep. And then throughout the day, our hydration and monitoring that, and our nutrition. But the biggest thing, I think, just like these other 2 gentlemen, is we're trying to be as cautious as possible, follow all safety protocols and daily basis. So we're making sure we're putting our student athletes and our staff at the safest point possible. So hopefully we get to competition soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Mike Compton, anything to add? So Mike is a former strength and conditioning coach, and he works for Fusion as a sports science consultant. So he actually has universities as his client. So I'd love to get a little information for what you're seeing from kind of the other side too.
Yeah, I think it's, from our perspective, it's just like compliance and everything. Like, how are you using your technology, and what is being used from that technology to facilitate educating your athletes or figuring out a plan and on what next steps you need to take. I do know a lot of our clients are utilizing the athlete app, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. But I think that's such a good frontline technology to use, because you can flag an athlete early on before they even step onto campus, and make that line of communication a lot easier, just like Mike Joseph said a little bit earlier. But out of the technology, I'd be curious to hear where you guys are kind of facilitating that, and what is being used, what metrics, and how you're flagging certain things out from those technologies that are being used throughout all 3 of those schools. Lauren, if you want to go ahead and start and kind of elaborate a little bit on the technology used. I know it might be a little bit different just because you're a little bit more remote than the other 2, but curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so we've kind of we're still obviously still remote, like I said, but we're getting closer and closer to getting back on campus. So we've been very much in a preparatory phase. And so what we're actually working today with one of our Smarter Base reps is actually getting our on-campus screening questionnaire the university has done across campus with employees, students, which is a part of we have what we call a return to learn kind of project that the UC system is doing. So there's actually a partnership with the medical sides of campus with UCLA, UC Irvine, UC San Diego with this Return to Learn project. So each of the campuses has a huge database that they've been prepping and putting together for intake of these COVID survey questionnaires. And so we've actually now, today, we'll start porting that into our Smarter Base system. And so that way it kind of limits the athletes having to do multiple questionnaires, if you will. And so once I've basically set up their landing page within the Smarter Base app so that they have their dashboard, there's a link on there and they get the push reminder, hey, remember to do your COVID questionnaire for campus. They'll do it on there. That'll push in now to our athletic trainers and medical staff. So they have a dashboard set up that just says green light, green or red, depending on their symptoms. Luckily, the campus saved us quite a few steps because their medical department created some workflows and triggers within their side of the system. So again, if someone does report symptoms, whatever, it automatically pushes to the athletic trainer, gets an email. Doctors get the email, and there's actually a workflow system within our medical system that'll, get them the information to the athletes and where they need to go. So that part, as far as getting set for when we do get back on campus, as the other gentleman said, we're kind of getting our ducks in a row as far as protocols go. We'll be testing. We actually have the ability, luckily, places because of our medical center and our research labs on campus, we can test pretty much daily on everyone if we needed to. We're not going to that case yet until we really get back onto campus, but we've already obviously been, for any athletes that are local in San Diego now and employees that are around, they send us an email that says, hey, if you want to make an appointment to get another test done, come on in. So we're pretty fortunate in that sense. So we're not like some of the schools that are handcuffed in that way. But yeah, so with that, that's kind of handled the testing part of the protocols. We're going to start as soon as we can, allowed to start doing questionnaires. So the athletes can start to just report any of their normal training things that are, ailments, whatnot. But again, that's part we're kind of handcuffed a little bit because they're still technically voluntary off season. So we can't ask all trainings going, we can't do that stuff just yet. And so we're sticking to what we need and what we have to do right now to make sure the athletes are returning safe. And we're not even getting to the point of the training yet until they get back onto campus. And we really have to start digging into that.
Tricia, I'll jump in there really quick. Lauren, I think you brought up a good point. As we keep talking about the different technology that are being used, is that a compliant, or like a compliance issue from the NCAA? Like, is it forcing an athlete to wear a heart rate monitor or a ring? Is there any like gray area of that, or all the athletes kind of expect this is how we're making sure that the environment is safe? Is there any issues or from that perspective? Mike, Joseph, do you want to jump in on that?
On that, we have something we worked through the last couple of years in here, and we work a lot with obviously with Smarter Base and Fusion Sport, but with Dr. Josh Hagan and our Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. And anything we do with our athletes obviously is a voluntary basis. There's some things like we do GPS, we do obviously hydration tests, we do sleep tracking, we do a lot of different things. But if an athlete wants to opt out, that's up to them. But one thing we do have anything we get information on data-wise, de-identified. It goes back to medical component. But the biggest thing we're trying to express our athletes in the culture is that accountability, trust, compliance in terms of in a safe environment. So I think it's one of the things where younger athletes are kind of unsure and understand the buy-in, but understand, and this is a totally different topic with being COVID and more extreme times, but in terms of normal situation, once athletes understand the importance, understand how everything kind of correlates, your sleep, your eating, how much stress on your player load in terms of GPS, how much are you recovering in terms of your recovery modalities and everything we have available for them. And obviously the injury rates go down, and then obviously performance goes up. But then also on the same note, if we're able to somewhat through HRV, somewhat through kind of maybe sleep trends, see how maybe their immune system getting a little bit weak, and see and they're going in a negative direction, where maybe proactive and kind of catching some illness, catching some things early on. Now, obviously, COVID is still a different thing in terms of seeing early, but my point is I think it allows athletes, but yes, there's a compliance thing because that's probably for the first 3 months or 3 to 4 months when we were kind of away from campus. Everything we did, we still kept moving forward, but it was a fully voluntary compliance that obviously I could not report and I could not get on athletes if they didn't do something, or I didn't report to the head coach or anything like that. So it was fully voluntary. But since we've been back, obviously the COVID wellness check-ins is mandatory, not just athletes, but staff. And that's one thing where Coach Brown and our administration wants to make sure that everything that athletes are doing, the staff must do. So it's everybody across the building. It's a safety for the university, safety for our athletic program and our student athletes. So yes, but everything we do is de-identified and nothing that's published, nothing is out in public.
Awesome, thanks. So Aaron, you're at training right now. What technology are you specifically using while you're doing this? Because, for me, I've been in the field for over 20 years and we always talk about data, right? Data is so important. Data drives decisions. And now we've gone from that to really meaningful data, right? The most important is, can I make anything of the tons of things I collect? So what are you finding within your environment for training that's meaningful, that's helping? And then I guess the other thing I'd like to ask is, what's your biggest learning to date with the pivot to, hey, how do we train our athletes and take care of them, to, oh my gosh, now we have to deal with COVID too and get meaningful data and all of that?
Oh boy, no doubt. I mean, I think for all of us, to some extent, this has been kind of drinking through, a fire hose since March. A lot of what we typically do, the programming that our strength and conditioning coaches typically do, and already kind of have pre-programmed and kind of thought out. You get a 13-week hiatus, and all of a sudden, kind of what's normal and what your normal routines are kind of go out the window. A little bit of a unique spin on that for me is that prior to COVID, we were already exploring, onboarding a new EMR system, and right smack dab in the center of that, COVID hit. So we're trying to merge, our newly onboarded, partnership with Fusion Sport and Smartabase, along with everything that we're also trying to learn, implement, discover, and manage as it relates to COVID. I think some of the technology, and really for the past handful of years, we've been kind of fully immersed with some of our sports and a lot of various technologies, Oura rings, omega waves, various heart rate variability type things, heart rate data. But I think some of the critical things that I'm looking at, I think the most to date right now, is definitely the daily COVID symptom screening that we're doing with Smartabase and the Athlete app. And I wish I had that technology when March hit and all of this started. And I think one of the unique challenges that we had to do is we sent all of our athletes home during spring break, and honestly, we didn't know during spring break that they weren't going to come back. That became, apparent that they were going to be remote learning for the rest of the spring. And now, instead of having, our 450 to 500 athletes here in Cincinnati, we now had to basically manage those athletes from all corners of the country, potentially some that were even, overseas, and having that capability to capture data or capture information seamlessly, without a tremendous amount of workforce, energy and time spent, was something that was sorely needed. And now that we've got the forward-facing app, it's beautiful. We're using this on a daily basis. Everybody in the building is using it, and then it's actually as we approach game day, I will have to generate a report and give that to basically our conference as part of our kind of a certifying package that, hey, these players, these support staff, these coaches are all, within guidelines of symptoms, plus their negative, PCR tests and that type of thing. So that data, has its practical clinical application, but it also has its practical application to us successfully playing a football game. And that will obviously carry over to our sports as we move forward with this academic year as well. But I would say the next kind of big thing that we're looking at is, and as we've, onboarded Smartabase and started to kind of bring our integrations up to speed, heart rate data, during activity post-COVID infection is something that we're taking a very critical look at as we kind of go through our step-by-step protocol of bringing those athletes back onto the field, back into the weight room safely. We want to make sure that from a cardiac standpoint that their heart is doing what it's supposed to do, that the heart rate elevates with activity and, you know, decreases and recovers with rest. And we want to make sure that we're, you know, basically staying on top of and capturing any kind of exercise intolerance and those types of things. So I'd say those are probably really the two biggest things that we're looking at on a nearly a daily basis right now at UC.
Yeah, that's awesome. I worked for Polar for 11 years. So we did a lot of work with heart rate and what that looked like. So I think that's a great lead in. What about you, Mike Joseph, regarding meaningful data on your side and some of your learnings with the pivot, I call, for COVID?
I agree fully, Aaron, in terms of up until March. So there's a lot of things we were looking in terms of tracking, and there's probably things I thought I was going to have a very good grasp on in terms of how to implement different research data, different points of maybe moving forward to our say GPS, our return to play format, our injury predictor, all different things. And I think it kind of just went out the window. But the biggest thing, and this, we had a conversation earlier, the return to play right now and athlete safety is probably the biggest thing in terms of performance components. And having a lot of baseline measurables with our force decks, with our first beat, omega wave, our HRVs and GPS allowed us to, when athletes got back, to have a somewhat format plan. Again, from July, and say mid-June to end of July, right before camp started, to say that everything went perfect, it didn't. To say that I knew exactly and I had all the answers is nowhere close, but it allowed me to, obviously in real time, at everybody first beat, we have 105 monitors, so every athlete was wearing it. So I was holding the iPad with my staff, athletic training. So every time we're doing a run, I'm able to measure and see their performance, where they're at. Obviously, a lot of athletes were deconditioned, and we sent home workouts. We did team builder, we did different things during the hiatus when guys are away from campus. But you still have a small percentage of guys don't do a lot on their own. There's just the guys that need to be pushed. So the biggest thing is everybody came back at a different point. We kind of developed three levels of conditioning. Somebody's in very good shape, somebody's in average where they probably should be at, and one that's below shape. And then similar type thing when we had a lot of guys that were either a couple guys that test positive, or we had guys that are contact traced, then you had guys that are out of any performance, any training, conditioning. So now they're deconditioned, and we went through the same thing. I was talking about a battery of our cardiac tests and different things with our medical staff and athletic AT staff. So then it goes back to, then some guys had some maybe red flags or something that had to come back slightly different. So our normally where you can develop a true macrocycle, microcycle, a true periodized program, it was kind of a little different. And I think that's probably the challenging, and Aaron and I talked about right beginning, is almost a day-to-day, and it's always adjusting. My communication with athletic training, my communication with the head coach, it kind of helped is obviously having the smart-based platform and having the ability to look at a lot of data and hopefully formulate a plan and individualize every plan for each guy has kind of helped, and get to the point where we keep moving forward and we're staying injury-free for the most part, and our guys are performing pretty well right now, and we keep moving forward and keep expectations keep going up. So that's the biggest thing. I think we get a lot of our things we had in place allows it to pull from, but also to build them in a kind of where it's a square one baseline program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really interesting. So just a quick side question, because again, my curiosity gets the best of me for you, are you noticing, do you have a time frame in which you feel like you can get somebody back to, and I want to say quote unquote normal? So they had, they were training normally, they ended up developing COVID, now they're back training with you. Do you think, is it taking like 2 weeks? Is it taking a month? Is it taking 6 weeks? Or are you just don't have enough data yet? I'm just curious.
I think it's an individual plan. To me, to say it's this much time it'd be false and misleading. I think it gets individual in terms of like our team position and our AT events, playing ship count, what we agree on. Yeah. And some guys come back quicker. Again, some guys, we had some guys out and they were back top of the heat in terms of running, conditioning, no issues. And some guys come back and they're struggling. It just goes back to their genetics and how they recover individually. But I think compared to where we were in July, our guys come back faster now than they did in July. Cool. They're very deconditioned, very not So they come back faster now, and obviously it's each individual case, but that's something, honestly, us as a medical staff and training staff, performance staff kind of meet and kind of find the best direction for that athlete.
Awesome. Great. And Lauren, we've got you back, I think. So tell us a little bit. So as you're like starting your training off, tell us what your plan is. Now you've got the same situation, right? Some of your athletes have tested positive for COVID. Some of them will test positive for COVID throughout the season. So what is your plan for meaningful data, wearables, and things like that moving forward?
Yeah, so it's actually a little interesting on our end, I think, because we had already kind of been switching away from kind of a linear periodization model as a staff in a department. Kind of somewhat of my background with professional sport, I had been used to working with these undulating schedules, especially time in the NBA, we had 3 games a week, 2 games a week, 4 games a week, and you had this up and down. And I had already almost kind of become accustomed to that before I got back in the college setting. And I was like, oh, wait, we have a normal weekly schedule. But with that, as kind of the coaches alluded to, they're like, you're still going to have rehabs and injuries. You're still going to have illness that comes up too. You never really truly do have this Sunday to Sunday or Monday to Monday schedule, right? We know that as professionals in the field. So we had already, as a staff and department, already saying, how do we equip ourselves best to adapt day to day with athletes? And again, this has really become a super stress test in that, and really saying, all right, well, popped up, I've got COVID now. What do we do? Right. And so our whole training paradigm in general has, kind of reverted back to basics, as Mike just said there. We want to find out, are you fit first? Or first, are you healthy? Let's look at some internal measures. Then are you fit? And then can you perform for your sport? If you're not healthy, I can't worry about getting you fit. If you're not fit, I can't worry about getting you faster and jumping higher. And so everything is just regressed backwards in that sense. So when they do come back day one, we've kind of created this almost like a test out system where athletes will come in day one, obviously testing. They'll do their what do you call the COVID screens and whatnot. And then from that point on, we'll do a movement screen. And we're kind of going from internal towards external a bit. Movement screen. And after the movement screen, then we start getting into whether it be fitness testing. Then we get into if there's a strength test. But if they don't get through the movement screen and don't show a level of propensity or competency in their movement patterns, again, if they look rusty, haven't moved well, haven't done much during the break, all right, we're gonna have to start back at square one. But as coach said, somebody might come in, they were kicking butt during the break and they happen to have access to a gym or happen to have workout equipment at home, and they were actually able to follow the plan to a T or even do more than that. And so they'll essentially just kind of breeze right through. It's almost like testing out of rudimentary math in school, right? If you're still fit, if you're still good, it shouldn't be a problem for you. And we'll get through that testing within a day or two. Those that aren't, okay, boom, we found our stop gate now, or stop point. Now we're going to keep starting from there. So essentially we've gone from essentially the internal to external kind of model there. And in that same sense, kind of created that as the work environment for our coaching staff as well. Again, because we don't have competitions to train for. Everything is starting from an athleticism level first before we get to sport specific. So we've actually gone to essentially a decentralized model somewhat for the fall. So taking everything out of the weight room, essentially everything's going out to the bigger field outdoors. And let's say if we had at 6 a.m. baseball, swim, and women's tennis, that was going to be in there, normal training time at 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. or so. They're all going to end up in one pool, and our coaches are going to say, all right, your low level fitness conditioning, you're going to be with coach X. Oh. Your remedial strength, you're going to be with coach Y. And that way, one, the athletes get a bit of social back, even though they're going to be socially distanced within training. Again, they might be 10 yards apart, but they're going to be back around some of their fellow athletes. Because the coaches themselves, and I jumped ahead here. As far as our campus regulations go, we still have to do all socially distant training when we get back to campus. So athletes still can't share balls. Teams won't have team practices. And so that kind of just blows the whole model up as it is from the beginning, because our coaches, our athletes are used to going, all right, team practice at 9, team lift at this time. Yeah. That's completely out the window for us, at least for right now. And so again, we had to find a decentralized model way to say, how do we get our touches with our athletes and our care to our athletes as best as we can without just blanket throwing out, PDF reports and sheets. And so essentially, again, what we've kind of done is set up SmarterBase to work as a scheduling system as much as it is just like any other data. So we've essentially created, for those that are familiar with SmarterBase's term, but related events or related entities, between facilities, coaches, and things. So we know when athlete X was going to be at the soccer field with this coach for that training course and whatnot. And so we've kind of set it up almost again like a class schedule, summer course, if you will. And so we can that way ensure we know what the training load load is as far as a perceived exertion and time and stimulus. We can account for accountable hours from an administrative standpoint. We know exactly where they're at, when they're at. And again, it's just turning the world kind of upside down a little bit for collegiate sports and how we're used to doing it. But we're going to give that a shot to see how that best fits our athletes. And so, but it's going to allow us to work with a greater coach to athlete ratio in these aspects, as we can now, instead of saying, oh crap, I have this one coach that's going to be with rowing that's got 50 athletes, I can now have 10 of those athletes with this coach, 10 with that coach, plus another 5 with these other 2 coaches. And now I can have a 1-to-15 ratio or 1-to-10 ratio versus a 1-to-40. And so we're hoping to have a higher quality that way. But then lastly, it also gives us a bit more of control of the training environment. So we actually can track and test our theories, if you will, a bit more. So one of the outcomes that we've, or proposed outcome we're hoping for out of this kind of fall experimental period, is to really test out our systems in a way, right? So we would obviously assume that injuries should theoretically happen most often during competition seasons. Well, if we see a spike of injuries during this time where we know there's no competitions and not even team training sessions, we either have to look at, are they completing our off-season training to a high enough level to keep them fit when they return? Was it good enough to begin with? Or 3, when they returned, what was our training effect on them, and how did that have an effect towards these injuries occurring if they happen to occur? So I think it clears up some of the muddy waters a bit if we really take advantage of how that data is being collected and what we're looking at. And so essentially kind of set up our exercise library to be broken into regions, stimuli, just a number of different things. So at any point in time after the fact, we've partnered up with our School of Data Science to just going to go back through all the numbers at the end of this and say what went well and what didn't, and how do we best duplicate that, replicate that later on, or what do we need to remove coming out of this later on. So hopefully there's a bit of a experimentation that goes along with this that'll give us some insight moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think that after we should have another session on what you learned. I think we'd all be interested, for real.
Yeah.
Mike Compton, any comments? I know that return to play and training is kind of your specialty. So please go ahead at will.
Yeah, well, I kind of will loop in, I guess, 2 questions here. Lauren, you touched on scheduling, and just from experience being a strength coach in the NCAA and understanding schedules and facilities and what that nightmare is in general outside of this COVID. So like my question is how are you handling that with now sports maybe not operating right now during the fall, so they're going to loop in during the spring? How are you managing different facilities? Is that going to affect training down the road with, field sports now practicing on hard surfaces? Are you concerned about that? How are we managing that? Maybe less time practicing because the fields need to be used. So there's just so much gray area, in my opinion, that you really need to plan for. But I guess we'll start with Aaron. Like, what's your perspective? How are facilities handling this? I could just only imagine the stresses from that perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting time. One of the things that we adopted early in the summer as we onboarded teams back to campus is we basically moved the weight rooms to kind of quasi outdoor facilities. So that ended up being something that seemingly has worked very successful for us. The only team currently that's actually in the building in their original weight room is our football team, and that's because we've had, part has to do with our testing regimen that we have with them. Also the success of kind of keeping them in a bubble and keeping them healthy. But it's a process that we're going through to try to reintegrate everybody, eventually back into their spaces. I can tell you, and I don't know if I have all the answers for this, because with what seemingly looks like, the rest of our 17 sports, all probably competing in the spring, utilizing space and, weight rooms and facilities and fields is going to be something that is going to be paramount, just because it's going to be kind of a hot commodity, if you will. But I mean, it's something that we all collectively, just from a communication standpoint, I think have done a really good job thus far. I think the one thing that COVID has done is, kind of humbled everybody and kind of has put everybody in check, and we're all, working as one big happy family, trying to, pull off what has seemingly been difficult for so many people. trying to make it as successful as possible for everybody, not just, one singular team or one singular unit. But I honestly will be hitting up Kim from Fusion Sport as we move forward towards the spring to see if there's anything that you guys can help me out with on that, because it's going to be coverage of those practices, of those lifts, of those conditioning sessions. It is going to be very critical to make sure that all of that is flowing smoothly and efficiently. So yeah, it's something that we have our eye on, very much so.
Yeah, I think we don't have the luxury like Lauren where it's great weather all the time and, it's sunny. So I can only imagine as we hit like winter and whatnot, that outdoor space is slowly going to dwindle away. Mike, anything to add from like facilities as well as training? The volume and duration of training sessions, I'm assuming, is going to shorten. So,
No, actually, similar to Aaron, our whole football weight room, which is about almost a 20,000 square foot weight room, we moved all our equipment out to our concourse. So my staff and I got a little extra lifting in throughout. And I agree, it's all hands on deck. And especially during times when trying to keep as many people staff away, just kind of limit the access or the cross between athletes and just general population. But the biggest thing also when we first started, being outside, having masks and obviously distancing, but the biggest thing, we had small groups. And I had 3 weight rooms set up and outside that I was able to, each of my assistants kind of work around, but I was able to monitor all of them at a very good distance. And we based it off of roommates. We were based it off their social circles. So the same people kind of lived together, rode together. That's who they worked out with. And for the first probably 6 weeks, and we're talking about, we had about anywhere from 12 to 13 groups a day. And it was rolling all day long. And obviously, like you're talking about the being in discipline, organized, being on time is very important. There's times maybe in years past that we were able to do extra this, that, but we were guys, we call RTT, ready to train. The guys that showed up, weighed in, all the stuff they need technology-wise set up. And we roll through a group, whether it be lifting, whether it be conditioning, and then obviously our athletic training staff being very good with us, being in all areas, all space, and think about improvising and adjust. And the one thing we talked with athletic training and our team physician, it actually helped us because we're right usually year round training in say heat or air conditioned weight room. We're outside in the heat, outside and different temperatures. So it had a little bit of part of help acclimatizing athletes back to getting in shape, returning to play. But in our Olympic sports, definitely basketball kept their weight room similar, but our Olympic sports will definitely move their outdoor space into in our big older field house area. So everybody's accommodating. And I think the biggest thing, like both gentlemen hit on earlier, it goes back to being very organized and planning out the proper way to keep safety, but also get the athletes back safely, get the athletes. And I like the idea of what Lauren said about getting athletes basic foundation and before they move on to specific areas. And I think it's a lot of us as strength coaches, us as younger professionals, maybe forget about that and goes and kind of push guys too quickly. Or you have sport coaches that want to get right away back into thinking, but there's no change. No, there's a lot of change. And I think we have to be the ones that kind of add the voice of reason, voice of this is how you need to do it first, and then have that trust with your head coach, your sport coach, and your athletic administrators. But I think it's definitely helped in there, but it was a trying time. And I think even now as we start to move back in, just because of weather and just because of the potential down the road of not having to use the concourse area, I think it's being intelligent and maintain the same discipline, distancing, the mask, and make sure that our hygiene is extremely high in terms of weight room cleanliness and our protocols, but also our student athletes are doing what they need to do too.
Awesome. Actually, I'd love to get a spin on the student athletes. We don't talk much about like what they're feeling, right? They've had, and we've got seniors going for scholarships, seniors that may want to go into professional sports, and would love to hear, I mean, understanding that everyone has a different viewpoint on the pandemic and if they even believe it or not, and what are your athletes feeling right now? Aaron, we'll start with you. Like, what's their overall, do they just want to get out there and play? Are they feeling like they're not safe? Are they taking, I mean, what are they thinking and feeling? I'm sure you're starting to get some of that too.
Yeah, I can tell you actually the beginning of kind of football camp was a very interesting time. I think that was, a point where seemingly information from other conferences was coming out on a daily basis. And our athletes, you're all in tune with, social media and the volume of information and the speed in which you're getting it. Honestly, I think that affected, not just, the players, but I think it affected the staff as well, trying to, kind of wade through the uncertainty a little bit. What I have seen and what I think is really an impressive thing that I think we can kind of tag back to the athletes themselves and kind of the culture we have is I think now that some of the uncertainty seems to be fading away, they're excited to get back to, why they came to UC, why they're here, on scholarship and to pursue the things that they want to do. I think it has affected a lot of them, greatly just, over that spring and over the summer kind of being shut down. And, I think, in some ways we're all creatures of habit and creatures of routine. And when that gets, completely pushed to the side and you start to lose some of those things that, kind of keep you on track and keep your compass going, I think that ends up taking a toll on you. So I think really for the largest, largest majority of our student athletes, I think they want to get back to, going to class. They want to get back into their sport. They want to, know that their sport is going to occur in the spring, that type of thing. So I think as some of those things, gain clarity, you're starting to see, kind of that light kind of turn on, from within them and really get back into enjoying what it is that they do. So that's been, I think the other side of the coin that's been really fun to see is them start to kind of get that identity back a little bit and really, look forward to the rest of this academic, school year as early we are, into this process.
Yeah, awesome. Normalcy is a good thing for athletes and students that age for sure. I was just about to ask Mike Joseph, but he disappeared. So Lauren, I'll switch to you. I'm sure you're starting to get a feel for what your student athletes are feeling. So would love to have some information and comments from you.
Yeah. So again, like it's especially here in the freshman talk more. I mean, we already know there's some differences between the power conferences and not as far as, again, the athletes and their plans after college, right? Obviously you go to some of these large Division I's, especially in sports, football, basketball, they have, usually have aspirations to go on to professional level. And not that other athletes don't. I mean, and there's obviously plenty of the quote unquote Cinderella stories of your Carson Wentz's and things that come from smaller schools, which is great. But, our school our athletes truly come there as students first, as scholars first. I mean, if you're not aware of UC San Diego, we're a top 5 public research institution in the U.S., a top 10 in the world, depending on which department you're looking at. Our School of Engineering is one of the most sought after ones in the world. And so like, they really do come with this student first, but they pick us because we are pushing the envelope on the athletic side. We are going to demand more of them. So they really come with this kind of Rhodes Scholar type of mentality. And what really was tough for a lot of them at the end of the spring was that literally was that classes and any of our classes last chance to win a postseason anything. We were having our best athletic year in school history. Our men's basketball team was hosting their region. Our women's basketball team was top 15. Our men's basketball team literally that week just got the #1 national rank for D2. We had a swimmer win nationals that week, and all these things were going well, and it was all cut. So all seniors, even if they return, no one has a chance to win anything now. And so it's completely changed, kind of just the environment and mindset. And so as we're talking to these athletes and coming back to campus, there really is this development of a culture that is, you're doing this for you, for your betterment, for your health, for pride. Because again, there's no point, we're not gonna lie to them and say, oh, this is for a ring. It's not. There's no, there is no championship to win. But they also knew that when they signed up with us, right? So they knew that we're coming in Division I probation period. They knew they're coming in to, again, give themselves a shot to play at a higher level, give themselves a chance to keep developing if they have freshman aspirations, and then just make their college time and experience that much more rich by being a part of a group where you're bleeding, sweating with your brothers and sisters and whatnot in the team, and you're also getting this great education to go along with it. And so really, again, our verbiage, our communication to the athletes has been about them, right? It's been about how are you going to make this your best experience? How do you get the most out of it? Because you chose to be here, COVID or not, you weren't going to win a championship this year. And so keeping their mind on that of how do you make the best of your college experience and get the most out of it and not leave it going, oh, I wish I would have done that, or I wish that was different, because that's irrelevant of COVID. We're going to do everything we can to make to try to get back to normalcy and make sure it's a safe environment for the athletes. But that shouldn't deter away from their effort and their time spent there. And so that's really been the key for us is, again, there is no shooting for a comp championship. So it's really about internal motivation and intrinsic kind of motivation for the athletes and keeping them in mind of that.
Yeah, very cool. So just shifting gears a little bit to daily wellness questionnaires, right? Usually we have 3 to 5 questions. We try to make them as short as possible so that the students, the athletes can fill them out. And so, some of the questions always revolve around soreness and how you're feeling and if your mood is good or not so good, how you slept and things like that. So are you guys still doing those with your COVID questionnaires, or are you noticing any trending on some of that information? I'd be curious on like even the mood piece, or do you notice more soreness or sleeping less or anything like that since some of the COVID stuff has started? Mike Joseph, I guess I'll start with you.
I think we still do both. Obviously, COVID's obviously more of a medical component in terms of there's specific questions that our physicians and our IT staff need to see, and then I still do a wellness because it kind of correlates a lot of different things trending, because every day on SmarterBase, I get on and see every guy look at how many, if they have any more like 3 negative data points, that's obviously an alert to me. And I'm going to kind of reach out to them personally, individually. It could be a mental, because we talked about, at least the gentleman hit on the head, because a lot of guys for the last 2 months are very stressed out. And it goes back to not COVID. There's a lot of other things going on in the world right now. It's very, very stressful for student athletes. And I think it goes back to that uncertainty for that month and a half was very, very hard on a lot of guys, like you said, that have aspirations. This is my last year. I want to play all whatever else, and not knowing where they're going to be. But it's a good insight of guys intrinsic. And I was saying we always get a lot of external loading and different things, but it gives an idea where guys are. And a lot of our guys are very honest on there. And you kind of get a direction where their moods are, or where their directions are daily or kind of you can project where they're going to be at the end of the week, project if something negative is going to happen in terms of just not sleeping well. But I think it goes back to, it's a way of us getting insight of them, but also them expressing, and we can kind of follow up and really kind of help them in not just the physical way, but a mental way.
Yep. Thank you. Aaron, any comments on that?
Yeah, we're, again, kind of early in the stage of implementing all of this stuff. We just got our football team kind of hooked up with Oura Rings. Got daily wellness stuff just, recently off the ground. So my data set that I'm looking at isn't gigantic, but some of the things that I did notice while we were at camp was kind of that week where there was a lot of, information that was coming out, with conferences and teams shutting down, that type of thing. There did seem to be a trend of sleep, quality reducing, as that week kind of went. And I think that kind of correlated just with the kind of the general mood. But as some of that seemingly has, either resolved or kind of taken a little bit of a different direction, you're starting to see that come back. But sleep obviously is a big thing that we're trying to, look at, and really trying to help the athletes kind of understand themselves a little bit better, and try to, maybe make that one recovery modality, if you will, as optimized as we can. And then the other thing that I think a lot of universities are, potentially dealing with is, this new kind of instruction, whether it's hybrid, online, now athletes sometimes have more times and they know what, more time on their hands than they know what to deal with. So trying to help them, maybe understanding how to manage that time, a little bit more efficiently, and making sure that they are getting the rest that they need is something that we're, working towards and trying to, ensure that integration is something useful to us and to them.
Yeah.
Can I add on that in terms of kind of add on with Aaron?
Sure.
That's one thing I think it's helped us having a little more of database, and 100% he's on the right direction in terms of having guys understand taking care of the body. But one thing we do is after practice, after workouts, they have to do some form of recovery. Some guys do multiple forms of recovery, and having that database, SmarterBase, to be able to pull direct correlations between injury or how their week performance were in terms of sleep, the performance in terms of end of week in terms of competition or practice, it allows guys a lot of quicker buy-in, but also then you see a lot of positive trends in terms of how guys doing extra, guys doing in the weight room more, guys in the training room doing little things that are going to help them better. But I think that's one thing where a smarter base, and Aaron's definitely in the right direction on that. That's going to be, you'll see a high correlation and a high buy-in at that point too.
Mhm. Awesome. We have about 10 minutes, and one thing that I want to cover and then take a couple of questions. So 1 year ago, if we were all to sit here and talk about everything that was going on in the world, a bubble would mean a very different thing than it does right now. So obviously the NCAA just patented the term battle in the bubble, which we all will come to believe that looks like that would be a March Madness thing, although they haven't specified yet, but they've now coined that and patented that phrase. So I think it's extremely close to impossible to do a bubble as you're going through your day-to-day jobs. But what are you getting for feedback from maybe staff or student athletes or the NCAA directly on this creation of this bubble that we're trying to create on your campus? So Lauren, I guess I'll start with you. It sounds like you're doing some, like you said, decentralized type things anyway, but taking it a step further, is it even possible?
So we actually tossed around the idea of a bubble on campus, particularly for the fall sports before fall sports got, postponed. And we knew it wasn't going to be a true bubble, like the NBA was able to do. We're not going to take all the teams in our conference and put them into Walt Disney or, which would be nice. It's not that far for us. It's fine. But realistically, I mean, obviously we know they're college students. And again, a part of the college experience is them getting out of their parents' house, getting on their own,
out of the bubble,
getting out of the bubble. Right. And so to put them in a bubble is almost just counterintuitive to somewhat of their experiences. But in reality, they do create some mini bubbles, right? They have their kind of cliques and groups of friends they hang with. They have their study people within their cohorts or their majors and classes. They have their teammates that they're with. So there are some small bubbles. And what we were trying to do is to say, and this is kind of interesting on our campus, that we have our university has 6 colleges, which are essentially kind of these communities on campus that that all students are kind of in. And so there's these kind of natural pods already created or rooms already created. But what we were going to do was we had essentially one of the colleges, the sets of dorms, things that were getting renovated, and there's another one getting added. But earlier in the summer, we were talking about, all right, our fall teams, they go in there, if they're already in a pod or group that they live with off campus, can we get them onto campus in a suite? Can we create some pods within there? But again, the reality of it is, and we're talking about this again, we're talking about student athletes and these young people that, again, came for some sort of freedom, whatever else, but we can't lock them on campus. We can't do like the NBA did and get Connexon sensors on everyone to track them where they're going in a local positioning system. And we're talking about like not even just privacy infringement, but if we look at it from a simple standpoint of NCAA regulations, those are now 24-hour accountable hours, right? And so do we just say that you're on lockdown, you're under team watch all day? It's not realistic, and I don't think it's even healthy for the athlete at this point. And so the idea really comes into how do we create a bubble of control for us as far as management of the athletes, again, assessing them for infiltration, if you will, of illness, and education on them as much as possible. And I know we use that term a lot, but again, education, learning by definition is a change in experience change in behavior due to a past experience, right? And so we want to create these experiences for these athletes to understand how their behavior is going to affect them. And we do that in subtle nudges and whatnot. But again, that goes back to the wellness questionnaires. Hey, if you're not communicating with me, I can't help you. Help me help you, right? And we started that with our before we got Smarter Base, I had our kind of bespoke questionnaires we did. And going back a little bit to the question before was we saw plenty of trends in and out of midterms and out of finals where sleep's declining, stress goes up, right? It seems simple, and everyone would assume that, but how often do coaches program for that? How often do our team coaches adjust to that? And so for us now, this is really, again, a chance for us to kind of experiment with some of those ideas and say, hey, as Aaron said, like they have more online classes and more kind of free time. All right, what environment are you taking that class? Are you going sitting on your patio outside? Are you getting some vitamin D? Are you lock yourself up in your room for 7 straight hours while you're doing work and focusing? Are you going for a walk? But those things that we can start to influence lifestyle habits just with education and communication there, and just see how much, again, we can get them to change their behavior in that sense. But just like in all this for all of us, it comes to our own behaviors and actions and how much we put ourselves at risk and accept risk and whatnot. And so as long as we can get the athletes to understand and assume risk in an appropriate manner, that should lend us to better results in that. But it's unrealistic to think we can truly put them in a bubble excels, except for college basketball in the sense of a tournament, because we have the money to do so and can
Yep.
afford to.
Yeah, temporary bubble is okay.
Temporary bubble, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mike Compton, any comments there?
No, I mean, I'm right on board with Lauren and all that, but I guess the last question, and then we can dive into the questions by the people participating. Long term, what do we do from here? If COVID disappears, do we still monitor from that aspect, from managing heart rate, conditioning, maybe oxygen intake, anything from that matter that we're concerned about or looking towards the future? Aaron, from your perspective, really quick, and then we can dive into the questions below.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that I think we collectively as a medical community are very hopeful for, is that, some of the, the new things that may come out, whether it's different monitoring, different screening, different ways that we now process illness and the way that we manage it, will carry forward into, a better product of care that we're, or better service that we're offering to our student athletes. So I don't think this is just a thing that's going to be temporary, and in 8 months it's all going to be washed away and we're going to kind of go back to all the things that we used to do. But I'm very hopeful that a lot of the things that we're doing currently and implementing will carry forward and continue being able to monitor the kids better as they get back onto the field, whether that's from some other illness or from downtime, that type of thing, and really try to utilize this time to learn and educate ourselves and become better at what it is that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Quick thing on that,
Yeah.
And I know particularly as football teams, you guys are used to this and dealt with this before, but just general communicable disease, right? Like flu season every year, if we could catch, and this is something, I know a couple people talk about with the Oura Ring, but some other preliminary stuff they're doing with UCSF right now. If we can catch a COVID case or identify someone that's possibly going to have symptoms 2-4 days before and limit those exposures and not lose 5, 6, 8, 10 other players on the team, that's huge, right? And if we're talking about just normal, regular times, when we're talking about just the flu coming through or any other, God forbid we have a MRSA outbreak or something within a weight room or on campus, like if we can identify things before any communicable disease spreads, that's in general health practice, that's a benefit, right? And so what we're really doing, and this is it's been one large stress test on how good are we really at our protocols and really at serving the athletes, and what can we do better? And I think some of these things are really going to transfer out of it in the sense of going, oh, we maybe could have done that before, or now that we've identified and we have the tools, yeah, let's do that. Because at the end of the day, whether it's COVID, flu, pneumonia, whatever it may be, things that can be transmitted and moved around, like if we can stop it, that's always going to be a forefront for us to stop any spread of disease. So any of these general practices that we're taking from this that'll move on, I don't see why anyone wouldn't want to do that and get better from it.
Yeah, I like how you just said it was a test for everybody. I think it's just been a test for everybody's life in general, like so many different things that we could talk about. But I'm going to try to rapid fire just a couple of questions before we have to sign off. Does anybody know how the conferences are handling testing for the game officials? Good question. I have no idea. Anybody?
I can take our game officials and chain crew and anybody within kind of the inner bubble, if you will, on game day are all going to get tested.
That's what I figured, but okay, awesome. Are there any new products that any of you have seen really helpful in bringing the detrained athletes back up to speed? I think we all have our favorite heart rate monitors, GPS, trying to match training load intensity and that kind of stuff. Anything new on the market that anybody's interested in chatting on?
I don't know about new, just being the new guy on the block to Smarter Base and Fusion Sport. A lot of our teams use First Beat. I've heavily implemented Polar with some of the things that we've been doing with football. Got to tinker around with a product called VX Sport, which was pretty sharp. So I think, a lot of us, have had the capability in it. Now it's, maybe utilizing it a little bit better and maybe just a little bit of a different lens that you're looking at some of that information.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think same thing. Not to say groundbreaking new technology. I think just the technology, myself especially, I'm utilizing it better and understanding, looking at a different lens, like Aaron said, in a different way. So I think the technology I had, I'm actually maximizing more.
Awesome. Awesome. And final question. So I think you've probably all seen this article that came out linking Marty Cardias about 33% of the positive COVID cases in athletes. And are you seeing any correlations yourself, which I don't know if you can discuss anyway, but have you seen any longer term cardiac issues on any of your athletes, student athletes that have tested positive?
I actually had an athlete send that link to me about 20 minutes before we hopped onto this webinar.
Yeah.
I cannot say that we have seen that percentage that study is quoting or that group is quoting. I can tell you it's something that we obviously are looking at with, you know, a set of, you know, high focus binoculars, basically looking for it with, you know, various blood panels that we're doing to look at any kind of inflammatory markers. Full cardiac workups, that type of thing. It's something that we have seen before in other viral illnesses other than, you know, COVID. So it's not a new pathology that we're just now discovering. It's something that has been around for quite a while, but it is now something that we are, like I said, we've got, you know, looking everywhere for it just to make sure that we're not missing it. And any signs at all of exercise intolerance, I think that's where the communication lines between, you know, us, the athlete, you know, strength and conditioning performance staff is continuing to be very critical.
Oh, I love that you said exercise intolerance, and man, we could have talked about biomarkers the whole time. So I think we have to end. I think we just end, right? Because we're over our time.
That's okay. Yeah. Thank you, Tricia.
Okay.
And again, thank you to all of our panelists. We appreciate your time and your insight on this very important topic today. Again, for those who registered and for those who attended, you will be receiving a copy of this recording via email after the live session is over. So we encourage you to follow up with any other questions you may have directly with Fusion Sport. So thank you again to our panelists. Thanks to everybody who attended, and we hope to see you online again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.